A military soldier arrives at a hospital with an absurdly huge belly. And when the doctor does an ultrasound, he discovers that against all the laws of science, he is pregnant and with twins. But as soon as the babies are born, a shocking detail of the story is revealed. The doctor faints instantly. "Help, please. Someone help me," the soldier shouted at the entrance to the hospital as he helped another army soldier with a huge belly into the reception area. Dr. Marcus had barely put on his white coat and checked the first on-call tests of the day when another scream echoed throughout the hospital. It was a cry of pain, high-pitched, desperate, but different from the ones he, as an obstetrician, used to hear in that wing of the hospital. It wasn't the cry of one of his patients who had gone into labor. It was a male scream, a sound full of panic and suffering. Startled, the obstetrician dropped the papers on the table and ran off down the hallway, his stethoscope swinging around his neck and his shoes clacking on the smooth floor. As soon as he reached the reception desk, he stopped abruptly, his eyes wide at the surreal scene he saw. Two soldiers stood at the entrance, one supporting the other. One of them, visibly younger, looking no more than 25, was standing with difficulty, bent over, his face contorted with pain. He was wearing his army uniform, but it was impossible not to notice the most striking thing about his appearance: his stomach. It was round, large, absurdly large, so bulky and protruding that it resembled the stomach of a woman in her final months of pregnancy. It took the doctor a second to understand what he was seeing. "Oh my God, that man is pregnant. How is that possible?" he said, shocked, before running over to the young man to help him. "A stretcher, quick. Get a stretcher," he shouted to the nurses who were also looking at the scene with shock. While they waited, the doctor knelt down in front of the young man and asked, trying to remain calm, "What's wrong, young man? Can you tell me what's going on?" The soldier, whose name was Jason, clutched his stomach with both hands, his eyes filled with pain. Between moans and sobs he answered, I'm in a lot of pain, doctor. Here in my stomach, it hurts too much." The other soldier immediately rushed to explain the situation. He introduced himself as Michael and, trying to keep his composure, said, "His stomach started growing months ago, doctor, and it hasn't stopped growing. I told him to see a doctor, but he always said he was fine. Earlier today he was feeling some discomfort. But now the pain has become unbearable. He can't even stand up straight. There's something inside his stomach, doctor, but we have no idea what it is." When the nurse finally arrived with the stretcher, the doctor and the soldier helped the young man to lie down. As soon as the young man was laid down, the doctor put his hand on his stomach and felt something that made him instinctively flinch. "You're right. There's movement here," he said almost in a whisper. He approached and carefully pressed the young man's stomach on another side. A second later, the doctor felt something again, something stronger. It was like a little kick. Dr. Marcus took a step back, surprised, his eyes fixed on Jason's stomach. "That doesn't make sense at all," he stuttered. Even though he was an obstetrician and had cared for hundreds of pregnant women, and even though he knew exactly how a baby moves inside the womb, the situation left him speechless. That was impossible. The soldier was a young man, and men don't get pregnant. Without wasting any time, Dr. Marcus instructed, "Let's take him to my office. I need to examine him now." With the help of Michael and the nursing staff, they pushed the stretcher into Dr. Marcus's office. Jason moaned in pain the whole way, his breathing ragged. When they finally arrived, Michael asked, "Doctor, can I stay here? He's my friend. I don't want to leave him alone." Marcus nodded and replied, "Of course, but stay back so you don't interfere." As soon as they were alone, the doctor picked up his clipboard, looked at Jason, and said, "Seriously, Jason, before I give you some painkillers, I need to understand what's going on with you. Tell me, how long ago did your stomach start growing? Where exactly does it hurt?" Jason, still panting, replied, "It's been about 8 months." Michael, always by his friend's side, explained the situation better. "At first it just looked like a swelling, but then it started to grow. He started feeling the pain a few days ago. Out of nowhere, he says that there's something moving in there." As he listened, Dr. Marcus took notes, but his expression was one of pure shock. "It can't be. It's not possible." In his mind, the only plausible hypothesis was that perhaps, for some reason, he was dealing with a transgender person. Perhaps Jason had been born female, and that would explain his anatomy. With some hesitation, he took a deep breath and asked, trying to be respectful, "Jason, forgive me if the question seems invasive, but are you a cisgender or transgender man?" Jason barely had time to say anything when he was interrupted by Michael, who took a step forward, visibly irritated by the insinuation. "Are you asking if he's a woman?" "No, doctor. He's a man. I've known this guy for years. We served together in the army. We've showered in the same locker room. We've been together all the time. There's no way he's a woman, okay? And Jason, with his face still contorted with pain, stuttered, "He's right, doctor. I'm a man. I always have been." Marcus was even more confused. He wiped his sweaty forehead and approached Jason's stomach again. He touched it gently and there was again another kick, a strong and very real kick. Michael stepped forward and said, almost trying to convince himself, That ain't a baby, doctor. It can't be. It's impossible." Dr. Marcus answered, but almost as if he were talking to himself. "Then explain to me how come there's something kicking in your friend's stomach, huh? This is exactly what a pregnant woman looks like at the end of her pregnancy." It was at that moment that the doctor made a decision. "Let's do an ultrasound now. We need to see what's in Jason's stomach right away. We have to find out what it is." The doctor started pushing the stretcher in a hurry and Jason shouted, "Doctor, do you really think it's necessary?" "I'm not pregnant, that's for sure." Without hesitating, Marcus replied, "Whether you're pregnant or not, Jason, we need to know what this is, and the ultrasound is the only way." Michael frowned and Jason let out another cry of pain. "All right, just hurry it up, doctor. I can't stand this pain any longer," said the young soldier. And so the three of them made their way through the hospital hallways, the mystery growing with every step, while the hospital sounds seemed to whisper questions that no one could answer. As they walked, the doctor thought. No matter how hard he tried to remain rational, Dr. Marcus couldn't shake the thought that was hammering away in his mind. He wanted to believe in another explanation. He desperately sought a justification that didn't involve a young man being pregnant. But there was no escape. Everything pointed to a pregnancy. The size of Jason's stomach, the internal movements, the kicks, all the signs were there, right before their eyes. The only problem was that it wasn't a young pregnant woman. It was a young pregnant man. A man with all the biological male traits. Yet his huge belly said otherwise. In the ultrasound room, the atmosphere seemed colder than usual. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Marcus approached the stretcher, took a deep breath, picked up the tube of gel, and began to spread the transparent substance over Jason's belly. The soldier shrank a little as he felt the cold contact but didn't say anything. He just closed his eyes, trying to endure another wave of pain. The obstetrician took the transducer from the device and looked at the two soldiers with a serious countenance. "Are you ready to see what's inside?" he asked, his voice low as if he was afraid of the answer. Jason shuddered. He didn't answer. He just bit his lips and kept his eyes closed. Michael, on the other hand, was impatient and restless. "Just do it, doctor. Please get it over with." "But I'm telling you it's not a baby. It can't be. This is crazy." Dr. Marcus didn't say a word. He simply placed the transducer on Jason's stomach, and the image began to appear on the monitor. At first it was just a blurry shadow. But within seconds what appeared on the screen made the doctor almost lose his balance. He had to hold on to the stretcher. His eyes were wide and his jaw dropped. There, right on the screen, two small bodies were taking shape. Two babies, twins. "Oh my God," Marcus whispered. Michael approached, his eyes a little confused. "What's that?" "It's not what I think it is, right?" Marcus nodded slowly, still in shock. "Indeed it is, Michael. Jason really is pregnant and with twins." Michael put his hand to his mouth, unable to contain his shock. He knew those images on the monitor well. He had seen his wife's ultrasounds in the past. He knew how to identify a baby from an ultrasound image. And those images, as crazy as they seemed, they were true. They were babies, moving, with heartbeats, with arms and legs, with life. Jason was really pregnant. The young soldier, for his part, laid on the stretcher, shaking his head repeatedly. "No, no, no. I can't be pregnant. It's not possible. I know there's something wrong with me, but it's not that." Dr. Marcus answered firmly while keeping his eyes on the monitor. "The ultrasound doesn't lie, Jason. It shows exactly what's inside you. And what it's showing is two babies. Two big babies. You are pregnant. There's no denying it." But before anyone could react, Jason let out a scream. A scream louder than all the previous ones. His body bent over on the stretcher. His hands clenched his sides tightly, and his eyes widened in pain. Suddenly, a yellowish liquid began to drip over the edge of the stretcher and onto the floor. Dr. Marcus approached, and his eyes widened even more. "I think your water broke," he said. Everyone in the room looked at each other, paralyzed. No one knew exactly where that liquid had come from, but it was, without a doubt, amniotic fluid. Jason was about to give birth. The doctor knew that liquid well. He had seen it hundreds of times before, but none of his patients were men. From that moment on, the obstetrician went into automatic mode. He was too experienced to hesitate in the face of an imminent birth, no matter how surreal the situation was. "We need to take him to the delivery room. Now, quickly," exclaimed the doctor, already pushing the stretcher with the nurse's help. Jason, still in shock, mumbled several things. "I can't be pregnant. I'm not. There's something wrong." But his body said otherwise. The contractions came in waves of pain. Sweat ran down his face and his heartbeat was racing. Michael, distressed, couldn't stop shaking his head, also in denial. "It doesn't make sense. Jason is my friend. We grew up together. We serve in the army together. I've seen him without clothes so many times. He is a man. That's impossible." "Impossible." Dr. Marcus quickly turned to Michael and said firmly, "Wait outside, Michael. I'll let you know as soon as we're done. We need to figure out how to get these babies out. Jason is giving birth right now." "Giving birth," repeated Michael. "You said birth?" Unable to argue, he obeyed, making his way back to the reception. Meanwhile, Jason was taken to the delivery room. The place was lit up and the equipment was ready. The doctor put on his gloves, positioned the scalpel next to the table, and began to organize the instruments needed for a cesarean section. But when Jason saw the scalpel, his eyes widened. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked, terrified. "A cesarean section. It's the only way to get the babies out," Marcus replied with a serious tone. "The only safe way." But Jason, between waves of pain, shouted, "No, doctor. Wait, stop. I don't want a C-section." The obstetrician frowned, not understanding his request. "Jason, you're a man, so a C-section is the only way. You're in labor and we need to take the babies out somehow. If I'm really pregnant, then I want to have a natural birth." "Please," he said, interrupting the doctor. Stunned, Dr. Marcus exchanged glances with the anesthesiologist who was also present. But before he could say anything, Jason began to take off his military pants. He struggled until he managed to take them off completely. What was revealed shocked everyone in the room. The anesthesiologist dropped what he was holding. One of the nurses put her hand to her mouth. The others took a few steps back. And Marcus's eyes widened in amazement. There, in front of them, was the truth about Jason's pregnancy that explained everything. The truth that he had hidden all this time. The truth that nobody expected. The silence only lasted a few seconds because soon after, Jason screamed again, a louder, more urgent scream. It was time. "Ah, they're coming. I can feel it. They're coming." At that moment, the entire medical staff plunged into panic and haste. But in order to understand such an absurd moment, a man about to give birth to twins, we need to go back in time a little bit. Back to before Jason's belly began to grow. Before everything changed, back to when everything still seemed normal. It was a muggy, cloudy morning. The sky, overcast with heavy clouds, heralded rain. Michael was standing next to the army bus, the vehicle that would take the squad to the airport, where they would embark on yet another mission to a military base located in the heart of the Arizona desert. A survival mission, the kind that demands more from the mind than the body. The other soldiers had already boarded the bus. Some were chatting, others just relaxing. But Michael remained outside, restless. He was alone, with a frown on his face and his cell phone in his hand, staring at the screen in silence, worried. There was a reason for his restlessness. His good friend Jason hadn't shown up yet, and the bus would leave soon enough. It was then that Sergeant Reynolds appeared, visibly impatient, with a firm look on his face and his arms crossed. "Get on the bus right away, soldier. We're ready to go and we're leaving now," he ordered. The young soldier turned around and said with a concerned tone, "I'm sorry, sir. Jason hasn't arrived yet. I've tried calling, texting, nothing. He's been missing since Friday. Something's wrong." The sergeant snorted like he didn't have the patience to deal with that kind of thing. "If he's not responsible enough to arrive in time, we'll teach him to be punctual later, but now we have a flight to catch. The army doesn't wait for anyone. Get on the bus, man. That's an order." Michael looked at the sergeant, visibly uncomfortable with the order. But before he could say anything, an even more authoritarian voice came from behind, his tone very serious. "What seems to be the problem here, men?" said the Captain Rivera. A tall man with broad shoulders and a stern look on his face. He was probably just over 50, but his presence commanded immediate respect. He was the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be feared. The sergeant turned quickly and saluted. "Captain, Private Michael is refusing to board the bus. He claims he's waiting for another soldier who hasn't shown up yet," he explained. Captain Rivera narrowed his eyes and stared at Michael. "Who exactly?" he asked. "Jason, sir. He's been missing since Friday and I'm worried." He's never done this kind of thing before. We've been friends for a long time. I know him, said Michael, nervous. The captain sighed deeply as if he had heard enough excuses. Jason, right? He really didn't show up for the call, but we're running late. If he doesn't show up, we'll go without him. And if he doesn't have a good explanation, he'll have to answer for it later. Michael tried to help his friend again. Sir, I've known Jason since the academy. He's never late. Something must have happened. Something serious. But the captain waved his hand indifferently. Enough, man. Get on the bus. The plane won't wait for us. With no choice, Michael saluted. Yes, sir. And then made his way to the bus. As he climbed the steps, he wondered, where the hell are you, bro? But as soon as the driver started the vehicle, a shout cut through the air. Wait. I'm here. Wait. All the passengers put their heads out of the windows to see a figure running in the distance, approaching with hurried steps, tripping over his own feet. It was him. It was Jason. He was wearing his army uniform, but he looked sweaty. His breathing labored. Even from a distance, they could see that something was strange about his countenance. Michael got up from his seat immediately. Wait, that's him. That's Jason, he shouted, pointing to his friend. The bus driver stopped the engine and opened the door. The late soldier quickly climbed the steps, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his shirt. The sergeant and the captain looked at each other with an expression of astonishment, as if they had seen a ghost. Then Sergeant Reynolds, pulling himself together, approached the young soldier and said, Do you realize how much trouble you've caused? Where were you, boy? Jason tried to catch his breath before answering. I'm sorry, sir. I had an accident on Friday. I was leaving the headquarters and then I woke up in the hospital. I had a headache and I didn't remember anything. They ended up keeping me under observation until this morning. When I saw what time it was, I ran. I didn't want to miss the mission. The captain crossed his arms. Which hospital did you stay in? Jason hesitated for a second, then answered, The downtown one. Everything is still a blur, but when I remembered the trip, I rushed here. The sergeant whispered something in the captain's ear. They both looked at Jason suspiciously. Even so, after a quick exchange of glances and a silent discussion, Rivera nodded dryly. Okay, you can come. Just know that your tardiness won't go unnoticed. We'll talk about this later. Yes, sir, said Jason, getting on the bus. He walked slowly down the narrow aisle, glancing at the empty seats as if looking for somewhere specific. It was then that he saw Michael. Dude, I'm here. Come on, sit down, said Michael with a smile. Michael made room and Jason sat down next to him. They greeted each other with a handshake and a brief hug. But the atmosphere was strange and Michael noticed that Jason was acting a little bit different. It was him all right, the same face, the same voice. But there was something strange. A more closed, more restrained demeanor. The bus started and little by little the road began to speed past the windows. Michael tried to make conversation. So, dude, tell me about this accident. What happened? Did you hit your head? Jason looked out of the window for a few seconds before answering. I don't know exactly. I just remember leaving the headquarters. Then I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I don't remember what happened. These past few days are a complete blur to me. Michael nodded, but his expression showed that he wasn't convinced. Something wasn't right. Something that couldn't be explained by a stumble and a blow to the head. So that's why you haven't replied to any of my messages or answered my calls? Asked Michael. I was worried, you know. I had no idea what had happened to you. Jason nodded slowly. Yeah, sorry. I haven't checked my phone yet. I just remember waking up in the hospital with that infernal headache. Michael sighed deeply and suggested what he thought was the right thing to do. Look, man, after an accident like that, maybe it's not the best time for a mission, you know? Maybe you should have stayed behind, resting. Jason pressed his lips together before answering. I did think about taking a medical leave, but this trip, this mission, it's too important for me. I want to rise in rank, so I couldn't miss this chance. Michael didn't insist but remained suspicious. During the drive to the airport, Michael tried to strike up a conversation again, recalling old jokes, funny stories from their training days in the academy. Jason would say something occasionally, but his words were slow and scattered, and his gaze empty. It was as if Michael was talking to someone who wasn't really there. Jason seemed distant and different, as if he were someone else. When they arrived at the airport, the soldiers started to get off and walk together to the runway, where the military plane was waiting. It was at this moment, amidst the bustle and noise of boarding, that Sergeant Reynolds approached Captain Rivera once again. The two of them walked discreetly away and took advantage of the moment to talk in private. The captain looked around to make sure no one was listening, and with wide eyes and rapid breathing he said, "How the hell is he here, Reynolds? Explain it to me." "How?" Reynolds replied nervously, his voice laden with tension. "I have no idea, sir, but that bastard should be dead." The captain shuddered. "Right, we saw everything." The sergeant agreed. "We did. There's no way he could have survived that. But now he's here, walking around as if nothing had happened. And what's worse, with no injuries." "How, Captain?" Rivera kept his eyes fixed on Jason, who was walking further ahead, next to Michael. "That's not possible. There's no way he survived," he said almost to himself. Sergeant Reynolds crossed his arms and faced his superior. "Do you think it's really possible that he doesn't remember anything? He does seem confused," he asked. The captain took a deep breath, keeping his worried countenance. "It could be, but we can't risk it. Even if he doesn't remember anything now, he probably will later," the sergeant pondered. The silence was interrupted by the captain once again, his voice dry and firm. "This mission will be his last. The desert will be his grave. He can't make it out of there alive. Do you understand?" Meanwhile, further along the runway, Jason was walking side by side with Michael. The sun was shining hot and the weather was sultry. Suddenly, Jason stumbled and put his hand to his forehead. A sudden nausea settled in. "Are you okay, bro?" Michael asked, holding him by the arm. Jason took a deep breath and nodded, trying to smile. Yeah, I'm fine. It was just dizziness." But Michael wasn't convinced. His tone was serious, almost paternal, even though he was the same age as his friend. "Dude, I think you should rethink this. First you hit your head. Then you lost your memory. Now you're getting dizzy out of nowhere. You should stay behind. You'll end up falling ill in the middle of the desert." Jason didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, clearly annoyed. Michael then, preparing to raise his hand to call the captain, said, "I'll call the captain. We have to tell him that you're not feeling well and that you need to go back." But at that moment, Jason looked up and shook his head. "No, wait. Don't call the captain. I'm fine. Trust me, it's nothing. Just don't say anything to the captain about this or the sergeant, okay? Promise me." Michael remained silent. There was something strange. Jason's look. It was as if he was looking at someone else and not Jason. Without saying another word, they headed for the plane and off they went. The journey to the military base in the Arizona desert was silent. And when they finally landed, as soon as they set foot on land, Jason ran to the nearest bush, threw himself on his knees and vomited. Michael followed behind, frightened. "See? I told you that you should have stayed in the quarters," he said. Jason wiped his mouth with his shirt sleeve and tried to argue. "Calm down. It's probably just flight sickness or a cold. It's nothing." But Michael was not at all calm. Suddenly, Sergeant Reynolds and Captain Rivera appeared. They called Jason with an authoritarian gesture. "Come with us, soldier," said the captain. They took the young man to an isolated room on the base, and as soon as the door closed, Reynolds got straight to the point. "We couldn't talk properly on the bus. Tell us again about your little accident." Jason remained calm and said the same thing he had said before. "Well, the only thing I remember was leaving the headquarters on Friday, and then I woke up in the hospital. I don't know what happened. I might have hit my head." Captain Rivera watched Jason's every gesture, every word. "Don't you remember anything from your last day at work?" he asked, his eyes fixed on Jason. "No, sir, nothing at all. My memory is a blur right now." "What? Did I miss something important?" The captain and the sergeant exchanged glances again. "No, nothing important," said Rivera with a forced smile. "We just wanted to check if you were all right. If you need anything, come to us." Dismissed. Jason nodded, saluted, and left. And as soon as he left, he walked with hurried steps to the closest bathroom. He locked the door, knelt in front of the toilet, and vomited again. His face was pale and sweaty and his body was shaking. When he finished, he looked in the mirror and whispered to himself, "They'll pay for what they did to you. They will pay. I'll make sure of it." Inside the other room, the atmosphere was tense. Sergeant Reynolds took a deep breath and said, "Maybe he's telling the truth. He really looks like he doesn't remember anything. Maybe we don't need to get rid of him." But the captain disagreed. He stared at the door and said, "Yes, we do. Today he might not remember, but tomorrow no one can guarantee that he won't say anything. Mark my words, Sergeant. That soldier needs to be in a ditch by the end of the week. Do you hear me?" During the first week of survival training in the Arizona desert, something about Jason seemed increasingly out of place. To Michael, Jason, the friend he had always known, was acting like a completely different person. The change wasn't just physical. Everything about his personality was different. During conversations on the trails, Jason made strange mistakes. When Michael recalled memorable moments from the past, he reacted with confusion as if he didn't remember. On one occasion, Michael laughed and said, "Remember when we almost drowned in the dam because you decided to play with that old tire?" Jason frowned, uncertain. "Tire? What dam?" Michael laughed awkwardly, trying to get around it. "See? You're even forgetting the tricks you used to pull." But deep down that answer disturbed him. The loss of those memories, precisely the ones that united them the most, was too strange. Michael tried to convince himself that it was all a consequence of the blow to the head. Perhaps with time, everything would return to normal. But there was more. Jason avoided the locker room, preferring to shower alone, always earlier or later than everyone else. He no longer changed in front of his colleagues, which used to be completely natural. Every day he became more reserved, as if he wanted to hide something. And to top it off, the physical symptoms didn't stop either. The nausea was frequent. Dizziness came out of nowhere. Jason said everything was under control, but his body told him otherwise. One day, while they were walking along one of the desert trails, under the scorching sun and suffocating humidity, Jason began to fall behind. He stopped suddenly, leaning on a cactus. "I need to stop for a minute," he said, panting. Michael immediately turned and walked over to him. "Dude, what's going on with you?" he asked worriedly. "You've been acting strange since the day you came running after the bus. It's not just your memory. There's the nausea, that weakness. And there's more. Your whole personality changed. You're not the same Jason I know." Jason tried to smile. "I'm just a bit sick, that's all. I'll get better soon." But Michael wasn't convinced. And at that moment something caught his eye. Jason had sat down on a rock, and as he leaned back, his shirt rode up slightly, revealing part of his belly. Michael frowned. It was way too strange to ignore. His belly looked swollen, slightly rounded, and he knew that Jason had always been very careful with his own body, rigid in training, proud, with an always defined abdomen. Michael stared at his belly for a few seconds without saying anything, but Jason noticed the look. This," he said quickly, pulling his shirt back on. "I haven't been able to train properly for the last few days, so I must have gained some weight." Michael didn't answer, but inside, his discomfort was growing. There was something about Jason that didn't seem like the friend he had always known. Meanwhile, in another part of the base, Sergeant Reynolds and Captain Rivera were observing Jason from a distance. "Even after this whole week, do you still think he's faking it?" asked the sergeant. Captain Rivera crossed his arms and replied coolly. "He may have lost his memory, but that doesn't mean we're in the clear. He could remember at any moment. And if he remembers what he saw that Friday, and especially if he remembers what we did to him, we're done for." "So what are we going to do?" asked Reynolds. The captain looked at the immensity of the desert, thoughtful, and said, "He's sick. Have you noticed? Very weak. I doubt he'll make it across the sand dunes. Not if something goes wrong." "What are you thinking about?" asked the sergeant. "Let's send him on a mission. Tell him he needs to get supplies from the other side of the dunes. We'll prepare a jeep and make sure he doesn't come back." Sergeant Reynolds arched his eyebrows. "How?" "We'll put a mini explosive charge under the jeep. Nothing big, just enough to damage the engine halfway. He won't be able to walk back to the base. Not sick like that. If the jeep stalls in the middle of the Arizona desert, well, no one will find him." The next day the plan was put into practice. Jason was called to the captain's office. Rivera pointed to a jeep positioned on the edge of the camp. "Soldier, I need you to cross the dunes and bring a shipment of supplies that's on the other side back to the base." Michael, who was watching from afar, hurried over. "I can go with him, sir. Or even better, I can do it myself. Jason isn't well. He could fall ill in the desert." But before the captain could answer, Sergeant Reynolds butted in. The order was given to Jason. He said that he's fine. Jason looked at Michael and tried to reassure him. "It's okay, man. I can handle it." With firm steps he made his way to the jeep. But before getting in he pretended to check the tires and the fuel gauge as if he were just checking the equipment. His eyes, however, analyzed everything with caution, and that's when he saw it. Under the seat there was a small device attached. He was sure it wasn't part of the original structure. Without hesitation, with skill and discretion, Jason removed the device and discreetly threw it into the sand behind a boulder seconds later. He then boarded the jeep and continued his journey, driving calmly to the other side of the dunes, where he carried out his mission without difficulty and returned safely. Captain Rivera watched from afar, restless. As soon as he saw Jason come back in one piece, he turned to Sergeant Reynolds, furious. "What the hell happened? Why didn't the jeep stall?" The sergeant shook his head, not knowing what to say. I don't know. Maybe he's protected by something. There's no other explanation. It's the second time we've tried to get rid of him and he gets away. And time passed. The weeks dragged by in the heart of the desert. Rivera and Reynolds continued to try to put an end to Jason, who knew their dark secret, but to no avail. In those sands, the heat was unbearable, the insects constant, the routine hard. But nothing drew more attention among the soldiers than one specific thing: Jason's stomach. It started to grow little by little, day by day. At first they said it was swelling. Maybe it was some kind of infection. But it soon became clear that there was something more. The volume, the shape, they were becoming too obvious to ignore. And nobody, absolutely nobody, had an explanation for what was about to happen. 3 months had passed since the group had been sent into the desert for survival training. The captain and the sergeant, who had initially planned to get rid of Jason at any cost, seemed to have given up on the idea. They no longer plotted against his life and seemed convinced that the boy would never remember what had happened that Friday. But while the two of them settled into this false certainty, something much more disturbing was growing before everyone's eyes: Jason's belly. Michael watched his friend with a mixture of astonishment and confusion. It didn't make sense. That man had always been obsessed with good nutrition, exercise, and a strict routine. How could he suddenly have a belly that size and getting bigger and bigger by the day? Jason, for his part, always came up with a different excuse. Sometimes he said it was bad digestion, and then that he was retaining fluids. But the truth was that he himself was terrified. When he was alone, he spoke quietly, running his hand over his stomach with a tense look on his face. It can't be what I'm thinking. If it is, it could ruin everything, he whispered, as if he was beginning to understand the bad situation he found himself in. There was only 1 day left until the end of the mission, and then they would return to the headquarters. Michael found Jason sitting alone in a corner, looking lost and with his hand resting on his stomach. "It's bigger, isn't it?" he said, trying to sound natural but not hiding his concern for his friend. Jason quickly straightened up and let out a weak smile. "Oh, I just ate too much. I've been feeling heavy these days." "Jason, that's enough." "This isn't normal," said Michael, interrupting him. "You need to go see a doctor. Like right now." "I'm fine, bro. As soon as we get back to base, everything will go back to normal. I'll get back to my routine and train properly. I'll get better. Relax. Trust me." Michael crossed his arms, not convinced. "You know this won't get better, right?" But Jason stuck to his lie. He didn't want to give in. And so, the next day the group left the desert and returned to the main base. The arrival caused an immediate stir. Soldiers who hadn't taken part in the mission were amazed by Jason's appearance. It was impossible not to notice that big, heavy, rigid belly. They kept asking what was going on, if he was okay, and he always smiled and said it was just a swelling, poor diet, and lack of training, the same excuses. But when he was alone he would worry more and more. In front of the mirror, he stared at his reflection with narrowed eyes, as if trying to discover some hidden truth in his own image. "Time is running out. I have to act soon. I need to prove who the captain and the sergeant really are and what those bastards did," he muttered, his hand on his huge belly. More weeks passed, 8 months to be precise. Jason's belly no longer looked human. Its size surpassed any logical explanation. It was huge, disproportionate, and firmer than any bloated belly anyone had ever seen. Even Reynolds and Rivera began to worry. Although they pretended to be indifferent, they would comment to each other, "Could it be a disease or some kind of parasite?" asked Reynolds. "If it is, he won't last long. I hear he doesn't want to go to the doctor." "Maybe it is," replied Rivera nonchalantly. "With luck, the thing inside him will kill him without us having to do anything. Even after all these months, I'm still not completely convinced that he won't remember anything from that night." Michael, on the other hand, watched his friend every day and insisted more and more that he seek medical help. "Jason, it's enough. You can't keep pretending that everything is fine. It's unsustainable. Look at the size of your stomach." Jason looked away, tried to smile, but his tone was no longer firm. "It will get better. I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time." It was exactly at that moment that the first wave of pain started. At first they were mild, but as the days went by, they became unbearable. Jason would squirm in the bathroom, biting the towel to muffle his screams. Sometimes he could barely walk. The contractions came in waves, accompanied by sweating, dizziness, and growing anguish. "I won't be able to stand it for long. I need to do something and do it now," he said breathlessly to himself. One evening, Jason was in the cafeteria, his belly already so big that he had to move his chair away from the table. He ran his hand over it carefully, trying to disguise the pain he was feeling. Then, as he got up to get some water, he passed Rivera and Reynolds and heard something that made him stop. "Tonight, there's a poker game with beer and everything," said the sergeant. "With the general and the other officers, right? VIP. I won't be back before 10 p.m., added the captain. Jason listened carefully, pretending not to hear anything, but his mind was working fast. With the two of them out of their offices, it would be the perfect time to do what he needed to do. The opportunity he had been waiting for months. He then returned to the table and sat down next to Michael, who kept looking at him uneasily. "You know you can trust me, right?" asked Michael, looking him in the eye. Jason hesitated. "Why are you saying that?" "Because I know you and I know there's something wrong. That huge stomach of yours, the way you've been acting lately, it's not because of the accident. It's not just an injury. It's like you're someone else." Jason lowered his head. "I told you, Michael, it's just swelling. And the accident left me a bit confused." Michael had had enough and got angry. "Dude, stop it. Look at the size of it. There are people here making fun of you, saying you're pregnant. And look, I know you're not because you're a man, but something there is moving. I saw it. I felt it. And you still want to pretend everything's normal?" There was silence. Michael took a deep breath and continued. "You don't even remember our old conversations. How can you forget everything about our friendship? Something happened to you, but you won't tell me." Jason took a while to reply. Then, with a low, firm voice, he looked his friend in the eye and said, "Just trust me, okay? Everything will work out soon." And in that look, there was something that could no longer be ignored. Jason knew something and Michael couldn't decipher what it was. That night, Jason said he was feeling a bit sick and went to bed early. Michael insisted on staying with him, but the soldier said he just needed to rest and that he just wanted some peace and quiet. But it was all just a strategy. He needed to get away, especially from Michael, who was getting closer and closer to discovering the truth. In the bedroom, he piled pillows and blankets under the sheet, forming the exact silhouette of a sleeping person. He turned off the lights, closed the door, and sneaked out through the empty hallways until he reached Captain Rivera's office. He needed to find evidence and he needed to do it fast. As soon as he entered the room, he felt a violent twinge in his stomach. He groaned softly and leaned against the wall. "Just a little longer. Just a little longer and it will all be over," he muttered, trying to convince himself that he could take it. With difficulty he went to the captain's desk. He opened the bottom drawer and there it was, a beige folder with the army symbol emblazoned on the cover. Inside were all the suspicious spreadsheets, documents, and budgets that he had been trying to track down for weeks. His hands were shaking. He took his cell phone out of his pocket, pointed at the papers and began to take photo after photo, sliding the pages one by one. But he barely had time to put the folder back in the drawer when he heard the doorknob turning. The door suddenly opened and there they were. Rivera entered first, eyes squinted, followed closely by Reynolds. They had left the poker game earlier for a private chat and didn't expect to find anyone, least of all Jason, rummaging through the drawers. Seeing the folder in his hands, the captain clenched his teeth and his fists. "You bastard," he said angrily. "I knew it. I knew you hadn't lost your memory at all." The sergeant followed him with a cold look in his eyes. "How the hell did you survive that night?" he asked, still not understanding. Jason staggered a little, putting his hand to his stomach. The pain returned, more intense. He took a step back. The captain didn't even wait for an answer. He turned to the sergeant and said with a cold tone, "It doesn't matter. You won't get out of here alive. He'll learn never to stick his nose where it doesn't belong again." Meanwhile, on the other side of the quarters, Michael was restless. Jason's sudden pain, his haste to lie down, something didn't seem right. So he decided to go check on his friend. But when he opened the door, he was startled. The bed was too tidy. He walked over and pulled back the sheet. Everything there was fake. Pillows and blankets piled up. "What have you gotten yourself into now, Jason?" he muttered, putting his hand to his head. Back at the captain's office, Rivera pulled a gun from his waistband, a black revolver with a silencer. "It's the end of the line, boy." But Jason, even in excruciating pain, acted quickly. In an impulse, he pushed the table on top of them both. The papers flew, the lamp swayed, and he ran out through the back door, holding his stomach with one hand. "He's getting away." "Get him!" shouted the captain, stumbling over the chair. Jason reached the second door quickly and, by a stroke of luck, saw a bunch of keys hanging from the lock. He didn't think twice. He locked the door from the outside and continued running through the dimly lit hallways. It was then that he bumped into Michael. "What's happening, Jason?" Michael exclaimed, panting. "Why are you running like that?" Jason tried to explain but doubled over in pain. His breathing was ragged and his legs could hardly support him. "Get me out of here now," he asked, his voice weak. "That's enough, Jason. You're sick and I'm taking you to the hospital. Take me wherever you want. Just get me out of here." Without wasting any time, Michael supported him and together they walked to the parking lot. They got into one of the military cars and drove off. Jason groaned with pain at every turn. Meanwhile, the chaos settled in the headquarters. Rivera and Reynolds had managed to get out of the office and were now searching the entire place for Jason. When they noticed that one of the cars was missing, they understood instantly. "He got away," growled Reynolds. "The hospital," said Rivera. "He was in pain. His stomach, that's where he went." Later that night, the military hospital went into a state of emergency. Doctors and nurses ran through the hallways while Dr. Marcus entered his office with Jason in Michael's arms. And after a careful ultrasound exam, Jason, now in the delivery room, was screaming in pain. The doctor couldn't believe what he was seeing. Everything that man, or at least what he believed to be a man, had said before was a lie. The truth was now out in the open. In front of the medical team, the truth revealed that that pregnant man was actually a pregnant woman. Jason, now with a feminine voice broken by pain, spoke with a sudden softness, almost like a plea. "I'm so sorry, doctor. I lied. I'm a woman." The tone of voice, the expression, the look, everything had changed. There was no longer any doubt. There was Jamie, not Jason. The woman behind the young soldier's disguise. Dr. Marcus remained silent. The shock was too great. But there was no time for questions. Her belly was big, rigid, and the time between contractions was decreasing. "You had to act. You're dilated. You'll need to push now," he said, taking charge of the situation. Jamie nodded, her eyes filling with tears. And there, amid screams, tears, and a truth finally exposed, the first cry filled the room. The high-pitched sound of a baby's cry breaking the silence. Then, the second cry, and there were the twins. The best-kept secret of that military base had just come to light. Outside the operating room, the atmosphere was tense. Michael, sitting at the reception desk, was trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. His best friend was in intense pain. He had run away from the headquarters with him, and now he was in a delivery room, supposedly in labor. The confusion in his mind was such that he could barely put his thoughts together. It was at that moment that the hurried footsteps of Sergeant Reynolds and Captain Rivera echoed through the hospital. They stopped right in front of Michael, their faces flushed with anger. "Where's Jason, Private?" asked Rivera bluntly. "Jason? He's with the doctor," replied Michael, getting up, confused. "What did he tell you?" asked the sergeant, his eyes fixed on the soldier. "What? He didn't tell me anything. What are you talking about?" "Where exactly is he?" asked Rivera, already impatient. "He's in the delivery room," he replied, pointing to the hallway. "But you can't go in there. He's being attended to." But the two didn't listen. They immediately turned and started running down the hallway, ignoring Michael's protests. The young soldier stood there in the middle of the reception, his head spinning. His friend pregnant? His superiors desperate? There were so many loose ends. And it was just then, when he thought nothing else could surprise him, that something even more absurd happened. He looked at the hospital entrance and froze. There, in front of his eyes, standing in the doorway, limping and with a scar on his face, was Jason. But not the Jason he had taken to the hospital. Not the one with the huge belly and the lost look. It was the real Jason, his friend, in civilian clothes, thinner, with the same face but with a totally different expression. Michael's eyes widened. "Jason." His friend approached, panting. "Where's my sister?" he asked directly. "Sister? What are you talking about? And how did you get here? What happened?" Back in the delivery room, confusion was also beginning to set in. Jamie, now holding her two newborn babies, was still trying to explain everything to Dr. Marcus, who was listening quietly in shock. "I had to do this, doctor. I couldn't leave my brother alone. He came to me. I'm in the military too, but he was wounded. And those two, they tried to kill him. I had to do something." But she was interrupted. The door to the room was flung wide open, and both Rivera and Reynolds burst in, panting and furious. They stopped abruptly when they saw Jason, or rather Jamie, with the two babies in her arms. The captain narrowed his eyes. "You have to accompany us now." Jamie looked up and, with a firm voice, for the first time using her feminine tone in front of them, replied, "I'm not who you think I am." Reynolds was paralyzed. Rivera seemed in a state of denial. And then the door to the room opened again. Michael entered, followed by the real Jason, limping on his leg but with a determined look on his face. "Game over," he said. "You've lost. There's nowhere to run now. My sister has already sent me the evidence against you, and the police know everything. It's over." The silence that followed was absolute. The captain rubbed his head, confused. "What the hell? What's going on here? There are two of you?" The same question echoed in the minds of Dr. Marcus, Michael, and even Sergeant Reynolds, who seemed just as surprised as everyone else. And that's when everything started to become clear. To understand how it all started, we have to go back in time a little, to that Friday a couple of days before the trip. Jason had just finished his work at the battalion and was getting ready to leave. Michael, who had left a little earlier, said goodbye with a smile. "Monday we'll meet at the bus stop for the trip. See you." Everything seemed peaceful until, by chance, Jason entered the sergeant's office to leave a report. The room was empty. He went to the desk and left the papers. But then he noticed something, a drawer that was not closed properly with a document showing. Curiosity took the best of him and he picked up the document, and as he read it, his blood ran cold in his veins. They were spreadsheets with suspicious movements, embezzlement, money intended for the army being transferred to personal accounts, signatures, Captain Rivera and Sergeant Reynolds. Jason couldn't believe his eyes. That explained a lot about the poor quality of the equipment, the uniforms, and the food. It was a crime and he had to report it. But before he could leave the room, he heard the door open and the two of them entered. They saw Jason with the documents in his hands. The reaction was immediate. "Shit, you shouldn't have seen that," said the captain. They tried to convince him to keep quiet about it, to join them in their plan. They said they needed someone like him within the base, someone to facilitate the processes. But Jason firmly refused. "I'm not going to go along with this. I'm not a criminal like you." As he turned to leave, he felt a blow to the head. Everything went dark. Jason woke up hours later with his arms and legs tied and was dragged by the two of them to a bridge. Still dizzy, he asked what they were going to do. "You've made your choice, kid," said the captain, and they threw him into the river. The current carried him away, but miraculously he managed to break free, swim to the shore, and survive. Although he had seriously injured his leg and had a head wound, he managed to walk with a limp to his sister Jamie's house. She had recently moved to the city and was also in the military. They were twins, physically identical. And there, that night, a plan began to unfold. Seeing her brother in that state, wounded, limping, and nearly dead, Jamie had no doubt about what she needed to do. This crime could not go unpunished. Someone had to make those responsible pay. And she knew that Jason's testimony alone wouldn't be enough. They needed proof, concrete, incontestable proof. And there was only one way to get it: to infiltrate into the captain's office again. Jason, even shaken, was against the idea at first. "You're crazy, Jamie. They almost killed me. And if they find you?" But she didn't hesitate. "They've already hurt you enough. They won't get me. We are identical, even though I'm a woman. Our bodies are similar because of my training." And the two were indeed very identical, real twins, the kind that caused confusion even in childhood. Jamie only had to make a few adjustments. She shaved her hair, bound her breasts with a headband, wore larger uniforms, and spent the whole weekend practicing to perfectly imitate her brother's voice. When she looked in the mirror for the last time before leaving, she no longer saw Jamie. She saw Jason. She was ready. Ready to face the criminals, to enter the snake's nest, and destroy everything from the inside. The plan was clear: pretend to have lost her memory, gather the evidence, and unmask them before the law. But there was one thing that even she didn't expect. In the very first days that she appeared in the headquarters as Jason, Jamie found out that she was pregnant from her ex-boyfriend. A relationship that had ended shortly before she moved to her brother's city. That's why day after day her belly grew, and so did the mystery surrounding it. Back in the present, in the delivery room with the babies in her arms, she looked steadily at Rivera and Reynolds. Their mask had already fallen. "It's over. All the photos of the documents, all the evidence has already been sent to the police, and your superiors already know everything." The two men looked at each other in despair. They still tried to act. The sergeant stretched out his hand towards the gun in his holster. The captain tried to advance, but they were slower than Michael, who swiftly took them both down. They fell to the ground with a thud, stunned. At that moment, the real Jason stepped forward, grabbed their guns and pointed them firmly. "It's over," he said without hesitation. Minutes later, the two were handcuffed and taken away, ready to pay for every crime they had committed. Jason, recovered and stronger than ever, returned to the army. No longer as a soldier but as a captain, now with respect, honor, and justice on his side. Jamie, for her part, no longer needed to pretend to be her brother. She let her hair grow, wore the clothes she liked, and devoted herself entirely to her children. She decided to leave the military for a while, but she would always have the spirit of courage. And so, the story of the man who was pregnant and who became the subject of jokes, suspicion, and disbelief finally had its truth revealed. And now, more than a mission accomplished, it was a story about love, justice, and life. A beautiful life.